When I collapsed at work, the doctors contacted my parents, the stark white walls of the emergency room blurring at the edges of my vision. But they were nowhere to be found. 3 days later, still tethered to a symphony of beeping machines, I reached for my phone, its screen a cold mirror reflecting my exhaustion. Instead of a message of concern, a plea for information, my sister's perpetually smiling face beamed back at me, tagging me in a carefully curated photo. "Family day without the drama," it proclaimed. The caption, dripping with artificial sweetness, burned sharper than the 4 needles stubbornly lodged in my arm. I didn't text, didn't call. Tears refused to come. I simply watched the likes climb, each notification a tiny hammer blow to my already fractured heart, and wondered when family had stopped being a sanctuary of unconditional love and morphed into a meticulously crafted performance for an unseen audience. Then silence. An agonizing, deafening silence that stretched into an eternity. Until, for days later, the jarring chime of my phone jolted me awake. 74 missed calls assaulted my screen, a frantic digital avalanche, followed by a single, terse message from my dad. "We need you." That's when everything shifted, the tectonic plates of my life grinding against each other, although not in the way they so desperately anticipated. I had lived under the delusion that bone-deep exhaustion was simply the price one paid for being dependable, for being the reliable anchor in a storm-tossed sea. At Green Tech, deadlines were not mere suggestions. They were ironclad decrees, and projects were endless, a Sisyphean torment. And somehow I was always the one left standing, the last soldier on the battlefield, the one who burned the midnight oil to make the impossible happen. My coworkers, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and pity, would often comment that I possessed a level of discipline that bordered on the unsettling, that verged on the superhuman. Little did they know, it wasn't some innate drive, some inherent ambition that fueled my relentless pursuit. It was sheer, unadulterated survival. Because every hour I clocked in, every line of code I wrote, every spreadsheet I meticulously crafted wasn't just for me, for my own advancement. It was for the legion of people back home, desperately waiting to be rescued, to be bailed out yet again. My dad, Robert, a shadow of the man he once was, had been out of steady work since the devastating housing market crash of '08. He clung to the narrative that it was merely a temporary setback, a fleeting inconvenience. But 7 years felt like a lifetime, a desolate, unending winter. My mom, Elena, ever the optimist, would always say that he simply needed time to reinvent himself, time to find his footing. But what he truly needed, what they all needed, was a steady stream of income, someone else's paycheck to siphon from. My sister Marissa, the self-proclaimed influencer of our family, was always launching something new, some ephemeral venture destined to crash and burn. A wellness brand that promised enlightenment through overpriced crystals. A podcast that explored the depths of her own navel-gazing. A candle line that smelled vaguely of disappointment and regret. Each endeavor failed more spectacularly than the last, leaving a trail of debt and broken promises in its wake. My support often materialized in the form of quick, discreet electronic transfers, labeled with vaguely apologetic notes. Help, or simply, just this month. And then there was Peyton, the youngest, still navigating the treacherous waters of design school, who fancied herself the family's designated peacekeeper. She never argued, never confronted, never ruffled feathers. She simply borrowed quietly and consistently, and forgot loudly and conveniently. From the outside, from the carefully curated snapshots shared on social media, we were the picture of perfection. A smiling family, resplendent in matching sweaters in idyllic holiday photos, all punctuated with forced laughter and strained smiles. Online, Marissa, with her talent for crafting deceptive narratives, called us the Millers, living proof that love conquers all. She'd posted that gem right after I'd single-handedly covered Mom's delinquent car insurance bill and miraculously prevented the looming foreclosure by paying the mortgage's late fee. Love, apparently, had a rather substantial balance due. Grandpa Joe, my only confidant, was the only one who ever saw through the elaborate charade, the only one who could decipher the unspoken truths that simmered beneath the surface. He'd spent 40 years as a law firm accountant, a seasoned veteran of financial warfare, and possessed the uncanny ability to read people like meticulously crafted spreadsheets. "You can't audit love, Ava," he once told me, his voice laced with a weary wisdom. "But you'll know when the numbers stop adding up, when the debits outweigh the credits." He warned me gently, with the patient concern of a seasoned observer, that my parents had gradually, almost imperceptibly, begun to view me as their fail-safe, their unwavering fallback plan, the ATM of last resort. I desperately didn't want to believe him. I'd been raised on the antiquated notion that unwavering loyalty could fix anything, that familial bonds were unbreakable, impervious to strain. So I kept fixing, kept patching, kept bailing them out. I paid what I shouldn't, smiled when I shouldn't, swallowed my resentment and kept the family afloat. The truth, the chilling, undeniable truth, was that I was paralyzed by fear. Scared that if I ever dared to utter the word no, they'd finally reveal the true, transactional nature of their affection, what their love was really worth, which I suspected was precisely nothing. The night before I collapsed, I was still chained to my desk at the office at 10 p.m., staring blankly at blueprints that swam before my weary eyes, their intricate details blurring into an incomprehensible mess. My chest had been tightening for weeks, a persistent, dull ache that I'd attributed to stress. My vision would occasionally fade at the edges, like a faulty television screen flickering before shutting down completely. I desperately wanted to believe it was nothing more than stress, a temporary consequence of my demanding workload. I was wrong, so very wrong. But even then, as I begrudgingly packed up my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Marissa, her insatiable needs ever present. "Can you cover my rent? Promise I'll pay you back next month." The familiar pang of resentment shot through me. I typed a reply, then deleted it, the words bitter on my tongue. I typed it again, forcing a saccharine sweetness into my tone. Sure. That was the last message I sent before the floor rushed up to greet me, before the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of blinding white light. The hospital lights were aggressively white, sterile, too clean, as if they were trying to erase the events that had led me there, to sanitize the ugly truth of my existence. When I finally managed to pry my eyes open, everything was blurred, indistinct shapes and hazy outlines. The sterile white ceiling tiles, the tangled web of 4 lines snaking towards me, the nurse's concerned face hovering above me, asking, "Do you know where you are?" I didn't answer right away. I was still struggling to piece together the fragments of the day, to remember what time it was, to grasp the reality of my situation. My phone was dead, its battery drained, mirroring my own depleted state. My chest throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The monitor beside me beeped softly, a rhythmic pulse that kept time with something fragile, something irrevocably broken, inside me. When a doctor, his face etched with professional detachment, finally explained. His voice was calm, measured, but distant, devoid of empathy. "Cardiac event," he stated matter-of-factly. "You were lucky your coworker acted fast." Lucky. That word, delivered with such nonchalant ease, stung like a slap in the face. Because luck, pure, unadulterated chance, shouldn't be the only thing that kept me alive. Love, that elusive, conditional love I so desperately craved, should have done that. They told me they'd diligently called my emergency contacts, my parents, the people who were supposed to be my anchors, my protectors, but no one had answered. "We left several messages," the nurse added carefully, her tone laced with a subtle, almost apologetic note, as if she were afraid that the raw truth might inflict more pain than the 4-needle embedded in my arm. Hours bled into each other, an endless, monotonous stream. No calls, no visits, no sign that I even existed in their carefully constructed world. I watched the sunlight crawl across the sterile white wall, painting fleeting patterns of light and shadow, until it finally disappeared, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. On the 3rd day, the nurse, her face softening with a hint of genuine concern, wheeled in my phone, fully charged, its screen gleaming like a siren's call. I shouldn't have opened it, I knew I shouldn't have. But the temptation was too strong, the need for connection, however illusory, too overwhelming. I did. The first thing I saw wasn't a missed call, a text message of concern, a sign that I was missed. It was a notification, a digital breadcrumb leading me down a path of betrayal. You've been tagged in a post by an official account. My fingers trembled as I tapped it open, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The picture loaded slowly, agonizingly slowly, each pixel solidifying the horrifying reality. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, illuminating the sparkling surface of a tranquil lake. My family, smiling, laughing, gathered around a picnic table, a tableau of perfect, manufactured happiness. My mom, ever the domestic goddess, proudly brandishing her deviled eggs. My dad, beer in hand, his face relaxed, carefree, seemingly without a worry in the world. Peyton, flashing peace signs beside Marissa, whose carefully crafted caption glowed beneath their perfect, airbrushed faces. Family day without the drama. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis. The air sucked from my lungs. Couldn't breathe. The beeping from the monitor spiked erratically, mirroring the frantic pounding of my pulse. The irony, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the situation, was almost poetic. They had effectively erased me from their lives, all while pretending to celebrate the sanctity of family. I zoomed in on their faces, each one a mask of carefully constructed joy, smiling, relaxed, carefree. No one looked guilty. No one looked like they were missing me. No one appeared to give a damn that I was lying in a hospital bed with something fundamentally wrong with my heart. A nurse, oblivious to the internal turmoil raging within me, passed by and asked if I needed anything. No, I managed to croak out, my voice barely a whisper. I think I've had enough. I didn't comment, didn't call, didn't even text. I just stared, transfixed, until the phone screen dimmed, and my own reflection stared back at me pale, tired, and utterly devoid of hope, but suddenly strangely calm. That kind of eerie calm that doesn't stem from inner peace, but from a chilling clarity, from a sudden, devastating understanding. By the fourth day, fueled by a stubborn refusal to succumb, I started walking again, slow and unsteady, dragging the four-pole behind me like a cumbersome second shadow. The doctor, his brow furrowed with concern, warned that recovery would take weeks, perhaps months. He didn't know that it wouldn't just be my physical heart that needed healing, that the deepest wounds were invisible, etched onto my soul. Then, one morning, the silence shattered. My phone buzzed incessantly, a digital barrage that wouldn't cease. 74 missed calls. A text from Dad, terse, demanding, utterly devoid of emotion. We need you. Answer immediately. No, how are you? No apology for their blatant neglect. Just urgency, command, panic. I read it once, then again, the sheer audacity of it almost making me laugh, a hollow, mirthless sound. They ignored me when I was at my most vulnerable, when I needed them most. And now they were demanding that I save them, that I swoop in and fix the mess they'd created. But I didn't call back. Not this time. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a familiar name, a beacon of hope in the digital wasteland. Grandpa Joe, the only one whose name, whose presence, still evoked a sense of safety, a sense of belonging. When I pressed call, he answered on the second ring, his voice a comforting balm to my wounded spirit. Ava? He said quietly, his tone laced with an unspoken understanding. You don't have to explain. That was the first time in years that someone had spoken to me like I mattered, like my well-being held some significance. Grandpa Joe showed up 40 minutes later, still sporting his worn brown windbreaker, the one he'd had for decades, and that familiar, inscrutable expression that never gave anything away. He didn't hug me. He never was the hugging type. But he sat down beside my hospital bed, his presence a silent promise of unwavering support, like he'd been doing it his whole life. So, he said, his eyes glancing briefly at the monitor beside me, its rhythmic beeping a constant reminder of my fragility. They finally broke you, huh? I managed a weak smile, barely a flicker of recognition. Guess so. He didn't ask for details. He already knew. That was his way. Silent, surgical understanding, a rare and precious gift. He stayed the entire day, talking to my nurse, ensuring that my insurance covered what it should, meticulously scrutinizing every line of the bill. When the billing clerk mentioned a few unpaid balances, his expression didn't falter. He simply pulled out his tablet, its screen illuminating his weathered face, and began typing. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. "Taking stock," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Before you start cutting cords, you need to know where they all lead." And so we went through everything. My checking accounts, my automatic transfers, the car insurance payments, the credit card joint lines. My stomach churned as the list grew, a testament to my years of quiet sacrifice. Every week, money flowed out of my account like a slow, insidious bleeding, funding Marissa's latest failed venture, covering Peyton's rent, paying Mom's car insurance, even covering a utilities payment under my name for a house I hadn't lived in since college. How did I let this happen? I whispered, my voice laced with a mixture of shame and disbelief. "You thought it was love," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. "They thought it was obligation. Different math." That night, while the machines hummed their monotonous song and the hospital settled into a hushed quiet, Grandpa Joe showed me how to shut them off, one by one. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of self-preservation, a desperate act of survival. He drafted a spreadsheet, a detailed map of my financial obligations, wrote out every recurring payment, and handed it to me like a map out of hell, a guide to freedom. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice firm, resolute, "we start with the bank." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing that photo, their smiling faces, bathed in the warm glow of the sunlight, and hearing the faint, insistent beep of the monitor, a constant countdown to some unknown reckoning. The next morning, I called my bank from the hospital, my voice trembling slightly. The clerk, recognizing my voice, greeted me warmly, her tone laced with familiarity. I'd been the reliable one for years, the responsible customer who always paid on time, who never caused any trouble. By noon, the auto transfers were gone, severed with a single click. Marissa's account canceled. Peyton's rent deposit stopped. Mom's insurance removed. Each click felt like breathing again, like shedding a layer of suffocating weight. By evening, the phone started buzzing, a relentless assault on my senses. First, a text from Mom, her tone a carefully constructed blend of concern and accusation. "We just heard what happened. Why didn't you tell us?" Then, Peyton, her message dripping with manufactured innocence. "Can we talk? It's all a misunderstanding." I ignored them all, letting their pleas go unanswered, their attempts at manipulation falling on deaf ears. Grandpa Joe sat beside me, reading the paper, pretending not to watch my internal struggle, his presence a silent source of strength. "You feel guilty yet?" he asked finally, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Yeah," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "A little. That'll pass," he said, folding the newspaper with a decisive snap. "Guilt's the tax good people pay before freedom." The next day, I left the hospital, walking out under my own power, leaving behind the sterile environment and the suffocating weight of expectation. Grandpa Joe drove me home, his silence more comforting than any words could have been. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, the walls seeming to close in around me, like they were listening, judging. I silenced my phone, unplugged it from the wall, severing its connection to the outside world, and stared out the window for a long time, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Then, a vibration, a persistent buzzing that shattered the fragile silence. Another message from Dad, his tone escalating from concern to desperation. "This is serious. Call me now. Everything is falling apart." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. They'd mistaken my silence for surrender, my compliance for weakness. They didn't know that silence was the sound of me taking back control, of reclaiming my life. 2 days later, I was back at Grandpa Joe's place in Portland. A small, unassuming one-story house that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. A sanctuary of quiet strength. He'd cleared the dining table, spreading out files like a general preparing for war, laying out the battle plans. The afternoon sun slanted across stacks of papers, casting long shadows across the room. Payment histories, account statements, insurance letters, my financial fingerprints, evidence of years of quiet enabling, laid bare for all to see. Every story leaves a paper trail. Ava, he said, his voice low, but firm. Yours just happens to be in dollars. He wasn't wrong. By the time we finished, the picture was undeniably clear. I hadn't just helped them. I had been financing the illusion of their stability, propping up a house of cards that was destined to crumble. Without my income, everything they'd built, the carefully constructed image, the fleeting comfort, the suffocating control, would collapse. And it did. The calls doubled, then tripled, then became a constant, unrelenting barrage. My voicemail filled with my mother's careful voice, sweet on the surface, but sharp and demanding underneath, laced with a subtle threat. Ava, honey, we didn't know you were in the hospital. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Then, softer, almost a whisper, designed to tug at my heartstrings. Your father's worried about the mortgage again. Worried, not sorry. Marissa's texts came next, a flood of frantic pleas and desperate accusations. Screenshots of her empty bank account, dramatic crying emojis, and one message that cut deeper than any insult. If you don't fix this, I'll lose everything. I stared at it for a long time, the words searing themselves into my memory, before replying with a single, defiant word. Good. Then came Peyton's attempt, her message dripping with self-serving innocence. I'm not like them, she wrote, desperately trying to distance herself from the unfolding drama. Please don't punish me for their mistakes. I almost laughed. She'd said the same thing when I'd co-signed her lease last year, securing her a place to live. Grandpa Joe was watching me scroll through the messages, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly, like he'd seen this movie play out 1,000 times before. They're not calling because they care about you, Ava, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. They're calling because they're cornered. He was right again. The next morning, a car idled outside my apartment building, its presence a silent threat. Robert Miller, my father, was sitting in the driver's seat, staring up at my window, his face a mask of grim determination. He didn't text. He didn't come up. Just waited, like a debt collector waiting for a confession, waiting for me to break. I didn't go down. That afternoon, a new message arrived, its tone laced with venom. You're about to destroy everything we built. I hope you understand the damage you're causing. Everything we built. I read it twice out loud, just to taste the absurdity of it, to fully comprehend the depth of their delusion. I showed it to Grandpa Joe. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. That sentence says more than he ever meant it to. And then came the video, the final act in their desperate attempt to salvage their crumbling empire. Marissa uploaded it that night, a slow, emotional walkthrough of our childhood home, now empty, stripped bare. The camera panned across bare walls and scattered boxes, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. They took everything, she sobbed, her performance Oscar-worthy. And guess who let them? The video cut to a photo of me smiling, cropped from a family Christmas card years ago, my image twisted and distorted to serve their narrative. The caption, dripping with self-pity, read, "Sometimes blood doesn't mean family." The comments exploded, a digital wildfire of sympathy, pity, and judgment, fueled by their carefully crafted lies. Influencers reposted it, amplifying their message of victimhood. My inbox filled with hateful messages from strangers, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a monster. Grandpa Joe watched the whole thing in silence, his face a mask of quiet fury. Then he stood up, pulled his phone from his pocket, and made 3 calls, each one a calculated move in his counterattack. Within 48 hours, we had every document, every piece of evidence we needed to expose their lies. Mortgage papers, loan defaults, late fees. They'd used the house equity to pay off Marissa's credit cards and fund Peyton's business venture. A boutique candle studio that never opened, its dreams extinguished before they could even flicker. I didn't even have to expose them. The math did it for me, the numbers revealing their reckless mismanagement and blatant fraud. Still, I filed the fraud report, initiating the wheels of justice. Grandpa Joe and his lawyer, Mr. Clean, helped prepare a cease and desist order, prohibiting any contact, any impersonation, any financial claims. We sent it through certified mail, one to each of them, delivering a message that they couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, my mind finally at peace. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing relentlessly, its vibrations shaking me from my slumber. Peyton's face lit up my screen, her image distorted through the peephole downstairs, as she argued with building security, desperately trying to gain access. She hadn't been on the approved visitor list, a deliberate exclusion designed to keep them at bay. I saw her pacing outside, phone pressed to her ear, likely calling Marissa, orchestrating their next desperate move. I didn't go out, refusing to engage in their drama. Later, Grandpa Joe showed up again, holding a thick manila envelope, his expression grim. "They've done something stupid," he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Inside were printed emails, exchanges between my parents and a small, predatory law firm. Their words a chilling testament to their desperation. I scanned the text once, then twice, the horrifying reality sinking in. They were looking into legal guardianship over me, attempting to strip me of my autonomy and control my life. I read the header out loud, my voice trembling with disbelief. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship. Grandpa Joe sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "They tried this before with your uncle years ago. Didn't work then either. But this time he knew it could have, if I hadn't already moved everything under the trust he'd painstakingly created years ago, protecting me from their greed. If my doctor hadn't written statements verifying my stability, attesting to my sanity. If my HR department hadn't sent confirmation that I was on medical leave, not termination, preserving my reputation and my future. By the time they filed our preemptive paperwork, armed with legal defenses and unwavering support, had already hit the courthouse, preempting their attack. Their motion was dead on arrival, DOA, a legal non-starter. Still, they didn't stop, their obsession relentless. Marissa posted again, this time in tears, her mascara running down her cheeks, her face a mask of manufactured anguish as she spoke into the camera. "Mental illness doesn't always look like what you expect," she sobbed, her voice cracking with feigned emotion. "Sometimes the people you love push you away, isolate themselves. We're just trying to help her, to get her the help she needs, before it's too late." Her followers flooded the comments with sympathy, rallying to her cause. #PrayForAva started trending, a digital prayer circle forming around their lies, but social media has a short memory and an even shorter fuse. Someone found her old family day without the drama post and stitched it beside her crying video, juxtaposing the blatant hypocrisy with brutal clarity. So where was that concern when she was in the hospital? The caption read, exposing their blatant disregard for my well-being. The tide turned overnight, the digital mob turning against them with swift and brutal efficiency. Screenshots surfaced, revealing the truth behind Marissa's curated image. Marissa's brand deals, her sponsored posts during the week I was hospitalized, her blatant exploitation of my pain for personal gain. Her tweets mocking toxic siblings were unearthed, revealing her true colors. Peyton's Etsy page was bombarded with negative comments, customers demanding refunds, accusing her of exploiting my suffering for profit. My father's brokerage clients pulled out, their trust shattered by the scandal. Even my mother's Facebook was filled with hateful messages from strangers, demanding answers, condemning their actions. By Friday, the family's online empire had collapsed faster than their finances, their carefully constructed image reduced to ashes. Grandpa Joe handed me his coffee mug, his eyes filled with a quiet satisfaction. "You didn't have to lift a finger, Ava," he said, his voice laced with a subtle pride. The truth handled itself. That night, a single text arrived from my mother, a desperate plea for reconciliation. "Please, Ava, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard, wrestling with the ghosts of the past, the weight of obligation. Then, with a newfound resolve, I locked the screen and set it face down, severing the connection, choosing silence. Across the room, Grandpa Joe was reading, his presence a silent source of strength. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. "Yeah," I said quietly, my voice filled with a newfound peace. "Just done." But they weren't. The next morning, a courier delivered another envelope, its ominous presence disrupting the fragile peace I had finally found. This one wasn't from their lawyer, a faceless representative of their greed. It was from my father himself, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to manipulate me from beyond the grave. A handwritten will, the ink still wet, its words a final act of control. He'd rewritten it the week after the conservatorship failed, his desperation palpable. In shaky pen, it read, "In the event of my death, all assets go to the remaining family who maintain unity. Ava is disinherited until she reconciles." I couldn't help laughing, a hollow, mirthless sound that echoed through the empty apartment. It was the same manipulation, the same conditional love, just wrapped in formal ink, a final attempt to exert control from beyond the grave. I showed it to Grandpa Joe, my face a mask of amusement and disgust. "They still think I want something?" I said, shaking my head in disbelief. He smiled faintly, his eyes filled with a knowing wisdom. "They're not used to someone walking away before the money, Ava." That evening, I wrote my final reply, not through texts, not online, not through angry accusations or desperate pleas. My communication was delivered through my attorney, a formal, legally binding declaration. It was short, precise, and final, a definitive statement that severed all ties past, present, and future. I waive all rights to the estate and request permanent no contact. I signed it, sealed it, and handed it to Grandpa Joe, my hand trembling slightly. "File it Monday," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his silence a comforting affirmation. "What will you do now?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. I looked toward the window, my gaze drawn to the distant horizon. Outside, the rain was finally clearing, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of blue sky. "I think I'll rest," I said, my voice filled with a newfound hope. "Maybe somewhere quieter, somewhere I can finally breathe." For the first time in years, I meant it. 2 weeks later, the rain finally stopped, replaced by a clear, crisp autumn air. Grandpa Joe and I packed what little I cared to keep. A single suitcase filled with the essentials, my laptop, and a few photos that still felt like mine, images that hadn't been tainted by their lies. We drove east, leaving the city behind, heading toward the mountains of Colorado, seeking solace in the vast wilderness. He said he wanted to see the mountains again before winter, to breathe the clean, crisp air one last time. I didn't argue, didn't question his motives. I just watched the highway blur past, mile after mile, the world finally quieting, the noise and drama fading into the distance. The cabin we rented sat near a ridge lined with towering pine trees, its solitude a welcome balm to my wounded spirit. No noise, no traffic, no family, just silence, clean and honest. I worked remotely for Green Tech now, my workload reduced, my hours flexible, the pressure lifted. My days started with black coffee, savored in the quiet stillness of the morning, and ended with the soothing sound of the wind scraping against the roof, a lullaby of peace. Sometimes I'd still get messages, a cousin asking what really happened, a stranger saying they read the posts online, their curiosity piqued. I didn't answer, refusing to engage in their narratives, refusing to be drawn back into their drama. I didn't need to let them believe whatever version made sense to them, whatever narrative justified their judgment. My truth didn't need witnesses anymore. Grandpa Joe would sit by the window, newspaper in hand, pretending not to watch me breathe easier, his presence a silent affirmation of my journey. "You did it, Ava," he said one morning, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "You broke the cycle." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, a smile that hadn't been forced or fabricated. "It only cost everything," I said, a hint of irony in my voice. He chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the discount price, kiddo." And he was right, because what I gained was worth more than all the apologies, all the inheritances, all the forced family photos combined. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the provider, the fixer, or the daughter who owed everyone. I was just Ava, alive, unowned, and finally free. I used to think silence meant defeat, that walking away was the same as giving up. But now, I know that silence can be a choice, a border, a kind of peace that doesn't need anyone's permission, a sanctuary built with the bricks of self-respect. My family still tries to reach out, testing if I'll break the quiet, probing for weakness, using other people as intermediaries, hoping to lure me back into their web. I never do, refusing to break my silence, refusing to engage. Some stories don't need new chapters, don't need endless revisions. They just need to end, to be laid to rest. If you've ever been called selfish for finally putting yourself first, for prioritizing your own well-being over the demands of others, I hope this reminds you that choosing peace isn't betrayal, it's survival. They can keep their posts, their pity, their carefully constructed version of the truth. I'll keep my stillness, my laughter, my life, a life lived on my own terms, free from their manipulation. If you've ever had to walk away from your own blood to heal, to escape the toxicity and reclaim your soul, share your story below. You are not alone.